Hello. When should we pursue energy transition? Good photo that, isn't it? Let's have a look. Chris Nelder. When is the right time to execute energy transition from roads to rail and from fossil fuels to renewables? If you're a believer in the free market, you might say the right time for energy transition is when renewables are cheaper than fossil fuels. I mean, why pay 15 to 30 cents a kilowatt hour for rooftop solar photovoltaic system before incentives today when you can buy grid power for 8 cents to 15 cents depending on where you live? Why invest 600 billion in high-speed rail when we can just buy a few more cars and lay a bit more asphalt? Because if you waited for that, you'd quickly find yourself out of gas. As I explained last week, Chris Nelder did, blog, link, follow. The best available data suggests that the decline of conventional oil will finally overwhelm new drilling starting sometime between now and 2014. The latter estimate attempts to account for the ongoing recession in the OECD. Many analysis of oil data have projected 2012 as the beginning of the decline, such as the 2010 US Joint Forces Command Report, which said by 2012 surplus oil production capacity could entirely disappear, and as early as 2015 the shortfall in output could reach nearly 10 million barrels a day, and that's a lot. Later in the article, clearly it makes no sense to wait until renewables are cheaper than fossil fuels before beginning transition, particularly if you're talking about transportation fuels. To do so would be to gamble with the entire economy and risk severely negative outcomes, like fuel shortages, riots and depression. Are we really willing to take such risks simply because we prefer to believe that the free market will magically sort everything out, particularly when we know that our economic theory evolved in an age of energy surplus, which is now behind us? And he finishes this with, the right time to execute transition is not when the alternatives are cheaper. The right time is before it's too late, and while it's still affordable. That time was really 40 years ago. We have less than 2 years left before things really start getting difficult. What exactly are we still waiting for? And that photo was Pyongyang, North Korea, fun park there. Right, moving on. This is yesterday's crude oil NYMEX price, and it's at about $93 a barrel. And seeing everyone's talking about global recessions, that's a big price. That's a big number, eh? And that chart goes back about 9 months, 10 months, something like that. And that $93 a barrel is about in the middle there, about the average price that's been paid over the last 9 months. And the last 9 months haven't been booming, have they? I mean, it's not been all-out expansion, here we go, gangbusters. And we still have to pay $93 a barrel. And that's NYMEX, that's WTI. Brent crude out there in the real world is well over $100 a barrel and has been for all that time. This is McKinsey Quarterly, another oil shock ? It's impossible, though far from certain, that oil prices will spike in the years ahead. Here's why and how to prepare. It's been a while since the world has been truly preoccupied with the threat of sustained high oil prices. The global economic recovery has been muted and a double-dip recession remains possible. But that dour prospect shouldn't make executives sanguine about the risk of another oil shock. Emerging markets are still in the midst of a historic transition towards greater energy consumption. When global economic performance becomes more robust, oil demand is likely to grow faster than supply capacity can, and that happens As that happens, at some point before too long, supply and demand could collide, gently or ferociously. And if you signed up for McKinsey, you can read the whole of this article. And you get all sorts of interesting stuff if you press on all the boxes. This is highly industrialized, export-orientated economies are more vulnerable to oil price shocks because they need it for driving their industries. Real industry needs real energy. The more service-based economies don't need so much and wouldn't be so much affected. So on the far right, France, United Kingdom and the United States, who just fanny around, wouldn't be too affected by it short term. Germany, India and Japan, who make things, would be. South Africa hasn't got their energy consumption, they what's the word, when they use too much oil per person. But a place like China would really be very badly affected and would drop down that much by at $125 a barrel, and $150 a barrel would drop them down 1.5% of GDP, and I'd say that's at least, but it's 1.5 because that's what it says it is. Preparing for the unexpected. If the shock scenario outlined above unfolded, sustained high oil prices would challenge the top and bottom lines for many companies. This is mainly in talking to the American people, companies, but everyone's involved, obviously. However, high prices also could create opportunities for companies to differentiate themselves from competitors whose cost structures and operating approaches were ill-suited to the new environment. And for companies on the front lines of the resource productivity revolution, a prolonged oil price increase would be beneficial. Providers of a range of new technologies, from car batteries for electric vehicles to horizontal drilling and other tools for unconventional oil extraction, to biofuel production techniques, to electricity cogeneration equipment for manufacturers, would see their businesses grow faster than they would in a world of lower oil prices. In other words, there are going to be winners, and McKinsey, their advisors, to get on that train. And for the other people, get your shit together to make yourself ready for oil price shocks. So to get ahead of your competitors that have not done that sort of work. This article finishes with, in the long run, these structural changes could well be a positive development for the world, resulting in more predictable and sustainable energy supplies and prices. Obviously, the article's gone into a lot of things of how things can be made to be so nice, but navigating the transition would be challenging and would reward the well-prepared. The time is now for companies to start planning for the possibility of another price shock and a powerful market response. And you know which the response would be: downwards to a oil price shock. Just warning, that's all they're doing. McKinsey are trying to warn people. And that's Tom Jansen's principal author out of McKinsey's Houston office. Houston, we got a problem. MPG Matters study confirms growing desire for fuel efficiency. Ford products give customers power of choice. This is a bit of an advertified thing, but from Miami we get a national survey shows fuel economy has jumped dramatically in the last decade to become a primary reason to buy nearly every kind of vehicle. And at the bottom, a national survey by Maritz Research reveals that more than 40% of customers now view fuel economy as extremely important when considering a new vehicle purchase today. 1/3 of customers say fuel economy has the greatest impact on their next purchase. That's something, but in this new world that is not nearly enough. That is nothing to where it will be going. Only 1/3 thinking it's the greatest impact. They just don't understand. We understand a lot more in Europe. We've been at this for 40 years, and we're only at one small step ahead of where the United States has to go. Financial Times, Arab Spring drives up Middle East break-even oil price. What is a reasonable price for oil? Mohammed Al-Hamli, United Arab Emirates oil minister, defined it in Singapore this week as between $80 and $100 a barrel. The reasonable price level, in reality a price target, used to be a lot lower. Only 5 years ago, Mr. Al-Hamli would probably have said that a reasonable was about $50. But a look at the price that the UAE and fellow Middle East countries need to survive economically explains why ministers are now targeting much higher prices. The International Monetary Fund has just provided a timely update on the so-called break-even prices, the prices at which fiscal balance of Middle East oil producers is zero, given the level of expenditure and non-oil revenues, in other words, the price they need to keep their budget in balance. In its twice-yearly Regional Economic Outlook Middle East and Central Asia report, the IMF estimates that the break-even oil price for United Arab Emirates has now risen above $80 a barrel, up more than $60 a barrel from 2008. For Saudi Arabia, it is now at just $80 a barrel, up nearly $30 a barrel from 3 years ago. Even Kuwait, traditionally the richest emirate in the Gulf, has seen a hefty increase. So let's go to that IMF PDF. It's long and detailed and there's some wonderful stuff in it. I've just drawn this out for no particular reason. I just like the look of the chart, really. Darker brown are the oil exporters, lighter tan colour are the oil importers, but it just gives us an idea of, reminds us again that this is one of the central oil generating areas of the world, and it's terribly unstable at the moment. The oil exporters there: Algeria, Libya, southern Sudan, Saudi Arabia, Iraq, Iran, and then down the bottom we've got Bahrain, Qatar, United Arab Emirates, Oman, Yemen and Djibouti. Anyway, moving on. Most oil exporters have ramped up spending. This is not purely in reaction to the Arab Spring, but we can say that it is, with Yemen and Sudan at the bottom left have dropped spending down because of their problems. But the rest are ramping up, and these are percentage changes of total government expenditure. So we're talking 20, 30, 40, 50, 60% increases. Iraq, Algeria, Oman, Iran, United Arab Emirates, Bahrain, Saudi and Qatar. Huge increases in spending to keep their peoples happy. And this is another thing that will be a reality, and that dotted line might even go up because of that spending. Middle East oil production and consumption. The spotty line is oil consumption in their own countries, which you can see is bottom left, top righting. It's going up and up. And the blue line is oil production, and it's basically flat all the way back to 1965. So the production is flat, but they are using lots of their own juice. This is from the IMF doc, as you can see by the colouring of the charts. Global proven reserves to oil consumption. What I think this is, they've added up all the global proven reserves, divided by the oil consumption of this year, and made a yearly number up the left-hand scale. 25, 30, 35, but generally it's always been at about 40 years. So it's horrible, this is, and it should not be in there. It's from the BP Statistical Review, and I've seen it in there, and I hate it every time. This will be seen by ministers, government officials who are very busy, and they go, global proven reserves, that's good. Oil consumption, that's what we're using now, right? So divided that in, and so we've got 40, 45 years before we have to bother about this. Oh, fabulous. Okay, right, next. That is crap. The Guardian in the UK, military think tank urges US to cut oil use. Report from Military Advisory Board says US must reduce energy imports over the next decade as a national security imperative. And, oh yeah, just a note on that, Susan Goldenberg, who's writing the article, is the US environment correspondent. And I thought that was a shame. Not much of a shame, but you can see that it's the US environment correspondent that has to bring up these peak oil kind of related issues, when it's not really an environment issue. It's an oil energy desperate issue. But they obviously don't have a oil desperate issue correspondent. Anyway, in the article we get an influential military think tank is urging America to cut its oil use by 30% over the next decade as a national security imperative. In its report, the Military Advisory Board said the US should aim to drastically reduce its energy imports over the next decade, or else risk exposing the economy to devastating oil price shocks. This is a national security threat that grows every year, and we as a nation need to recognize it as such, said Vice Admiral Dennis McGinn, a former Deputy Chief of Naval Operations. This isn't just about the volatility of the gas price at the pump. This isn't just about big oil versus the environment. This is a national security problem manifesting itself economically, diplomatically, and militarily. It's not just gonna go away. The report, entitled Ensuring America's Freedom of Movement, a National Security Imperative to Reduce America's Oil Dependence, describes America's reliance on imported oil as the Achilles heel of our national security. More. The most promising in the short term are, this is just grabbed later in the article, the most promising in the short term are methanol, biofuel, ethanol, electric vehicles and natural gas. But the report is cautious about the use of the most widely available biofuel in the US, corn ethanol, because of its effect on global food supply. Yes. Burning in gas tanks food is dreadfully naughty. The report also offers policy guidelines for achieving the 30% reduction, such as more rigorous fuel economy standards in passenger cars. Commercial trucking businesses could explore using compressed natural gas. The government could expand the use of plug-in cars and biofuels on its fleets. It dismisses the argument put forward by Republicans and industry that America can insulate itself by sourcing its oil from friendly sources such as Canada and Mexico, or by increasing domestic drilling. Got that? Right. This is that report, which is link number 8, and this is towards the end of it in the conclusion. Obviously, it's all worth reading. 3 things strike us as we review our discussions. First, during the 9 months of work we have spent deliberating, conferring with energy and policy experts, and tasking our research team, it became quite evident that we can make a great progress towards a 30% reduction in oil use through efficiency. Indeed, it is baffling that our nation has not pursued these gains aggressively. But we are here, and we have the compelling need to act. The pursuit of energy efficiency should not be viewed as an environmental measure. It should be viewed as a step towards greater security. If we commit aggressively to efficiency, we will be more secure as a nation. Period. But nobody will listen again. I've been saying this for the 40 years since it should have been started, and it'll go on the same way. They'll talk about money, but they won't talk about energy. And at the start of this US military PDF is this. Man your stations. The Navy must have 16 million gallons of fuel a day to carry the fight to the enemy. Obviously a Second World War sort of promotion. Stick to your job. Oil is ammunition. And, yeah, treat it like another war and you might get somewhere. Treat it like it's all fine and you're going to lose the war that you didn't fight. We lose the war. Unless we're prepared. Bye.